Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. We are going to begin this presentation in exactly 1 minute. Okay. It is 1 o'clock, so we will begin the presentation today. And good morning, good afternoon, morning, depending on where you are. We are very happy to have you here today. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we hope that the information that we share, you will recognize the connection of MWBE, SBE, supplier diversity programs in your and their economic impact on communities. So we hope that you take some great notes today. And at the end of our presentation, if you have questions, we'll be happy to address those questions for you. Ron?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ron Thompson. I'm managing partner here at Thompson-Mitchell Consulting. I am an economist. My experience in both economic impact analysis and disparity research spans back about 20 years. My economic impact analysis includes the economic impact of the 9/11 terror attacks on New York City, the economic impact of specified NASA programs on the Florida economy, also large bridge and road construction projects, as well as the analysis of various industry sectors.
And good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. My name is Mitchell, and I have over 20 years of experience. Over the last 20 years, my professional experience has afforded me the opportunity to administer MWBE programs in both the public sector as well as the private industry. I've also designed and administered MWBE programs in outreach and community engagement in the construction industry, in public sector as well. I've conducted program policy research and development, managed and performed disparity research and disparity studies. Our collective experiences and unique qualifications create the perfect skill sets for Thompson-Mitchell to provide economic results that can be used to grow and advocate supplier diversity programs. So one of the things that we like to do is we like to just really hear from our listeners and see what their thoughts on economic development and economic impact. So in the chat, we just put a link there. If you would, in that link, tell us what comes to mind when you think of economic impact. And we are going to see what everyone has to say. Money, yes, absolutely. That's what it's all about, right? Anyone else have any thoughts or feedback? Jobs created, absolutely. What do you think about? One word that you think about when you think of economic impact? Taxes, yes, absolutely. Growth, that's really, really important. Someone said jobs again, absolutely. Families, oh, okay. Very good. Yep. Families. That's exactly what it means. Community development, yes. Community, absolutely. Absolutely. And so as you can see from everyone's comments, economic impact is really important and it affects everyone, families, jobs, the community, stability. I like that. Taxes, and particularly those taxes for the public industry, they rely on taxes to provide services to its constituency. So absolutely, thank you for participating in that poll.
All right, so obviously many of you have heard of economic impact analysis, and it has a lot of different uses and different purposes depending upon the industry. Next slide, please. So again, economic impact can be used for lots of different things. Business location or relocation, student enrollment, different industries, airports. In fact, you can do an economic impact analysis on anything so long as you have sound and really good input data. I mean, the economic impact of hip hop in North Carolina, who would have thought, right? And also you can see at the bottom, there's NASA. There's a NASA study. Now that's not the one that I was a part of, but the one that I was a part of was for Florida, and we quantified the economic impact of NASA at $4.1 billion on the Florida economy, and that it also supported nearly 41,000 jobs in Florida. And also too, if memory serves, the 9/11 study that I was a part of, we calculated the economic impact at $83 billion on the New York economy. So the other thing here is that, you know, economic impact analysis of supplier diversity programs, it's not new. As you can see by the slide, 2015, Baltimore's MBE program conducted an economic impact study of their spend with diverse suppliers. And by looking at the results, you can see that they came up with that their program supported nearly 27,000 jobs. It generated over $1 billion in wages. And that last bullet is interesting. According to the Baltimore MBE, to their supply diversity program, $1.60 worth of tax revenue was generated for every dollar spent of state funds. Now that's an important metric. We're going to dive into that a little bit later, but keep an eye on that. That's interesting. Dallas-Fort Worth, 2016, also did an impact study of their direct spend with diverse suppliers, which they came to show that they support 7,500 jobs, who generated $562 million in value added or economic activity, and also generated $61 million in state and local tax revenue. This one is particularly interesting. Pacific Gas and Electric, which is a large West Coast utility company, did an impact study of their spend with diverse suppliers. And as you can see, the numbers are huge. Their spend supports 45,000 jobs, generates $2.6 billion in wages, and also $2.4 billion in tax revenue. And while that's great, pay attention to how they use the results to promote their messaging. They essentially are able to talk about the fact that that spend just doesn't sit with the diverse suppliers. It ripples throughout the economy, and it benefits everyone in the community, from families to businesses. And also a little fun fact, PG&E, they have achieved a 40% spend with diverse suppliers over the last 6 years. And one last thing, it's not just public sector companies. There are other private sector companies like TIAA and CVS and other private sector companies that have also done impact studies of their supply diversity programs.
In my experience of conducting dozens and dozens of disparity studies, the construction spend with MWBE is usually the largest percentage of spend. And so the AGC of America also conducted an economic impact analysis on why it's important to have supplier diversity initiatives in the construction market. And as you'll see, what that study told us is that minority businesses are more likely to create jobs and employ workers in minority communities. And this is particularly important because creating jobs is one of the many functions of a supplier diversity program. And with effective supplier diversity programs, you'll create jobs in the communities that they're meant to benefit. So now we're going to go a little bit deeper into the elements of an economic impact analysis. There are four major elements or outputs that we'll talk about, and we'll illustrate what those outputs look like later on in the presentation. So let's review each one of them. So the first one is economic activity. How much money is being spent? What's the value of goods and services within a given geography? And an impact will tell you exactly what that spend has been or how many dollars are flowing through that economy. Tax revenue, particularly public sector agencies love to see this. Again, as I mentioned earlier, tax revenue is really how public agencies are able to do all of the great things that they do for its constituents. An economic impact analysis of your supplier diversity program will detail the dollars that are contributed to the tax revenue for different agencies. Jobs are important to local economy. An impact analysis will tell you how many jobs were created. So here's a question for our participants today. Do you know how many jobs have been created from your supplier diversity program? And earnings, of course, earnings. When working adults make money, they generally spend it in that geographic area, again, feeding back into the value added or the economic activity.
So let's say, for example, that a municipality issues a construction contract to a minority-owned general contractor. Now, this could be any sector, but we just chose construction. The awarded contract to the minority-owned contractor is the direct impact of the supplier diversity program. The general contractor then hires a plumbing company to furnish and install fixtures. Of course, that plumbing company will buy its materials and supplies from a local warehouse. This represents the indirect impact of the contract awarded to the minority general contractor. And then finally, the wages that are paid to new and existing employees of the general contractor, the plumbing company, the warehouse, and other firms, that gets spent on groceries, housing, and other goods and services. This is the induced impact. And what this shows is how the spend with diverse suppliers ripples throughout the economy, because that induced impact just keeps on flowing. Now, if you remember earlier, I talked about how CVS did an economic impact report. Well, this is a slide from their report, and this is sort of a good example of how a company can use the direct, indirect, and induced impacts as key components to their program messaging. Notice here that the direct impact, they spent $2.2 billion with diverse suppliers. And that supported nearly 13,000 jobs and also created nearly 640 million in wages. Now, the indirect impact came from the fact that the small businesses that they purchased from also went out and spent $500 million, supported another over 7,600 jobs. And then finally, that induced impact, that money that keeps on flowing throughout the economy, well, that generated another 1.6 billion in economic activity and supported another almost 11,000 jobs. So now we're going to get into our methodology. Our methodology follows industry standards as well as best practices. So Thompson-Mitchell's methodology uses input-output multipliers to analyze the economic impact of MWBE direct spend on geographic or relevant market areas. Now, input-output multipliers are analytical tools that measure how a total change in output results from a change in input of a certain economic sector. Linkages and leakages, which I hate because you say that they're very similar, are key components in determining the multiplier effect that's associated with an economic impact analysis. Linkages are the level of connectivity between economic sectors, because when you have an impact, it just doesn't affect that one sector. Certain sectors are highly correlated. And from an employment standpoint, you will see employment in related sectors that will result from an initial impact. And leakages are the quantity of an economic event that are spent outside of the local market versus the amount that's spent locally. And then finally, we employ return on investment and payback methodologies to help our clients advocate for the supplier diversity programs. And in this instance, the return on investment is the benefit of the investment divided by the cost. And the payback methodology is simply the amount of time it takes to recoup the investment. Also, there are various data sources that we use to create our economic impact models. Implant is a company that uses data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, Bureau of Labor Statistics, from Census, along with their own proprietary knowledge to create models that can be used to perform economic impact analysis at various geographies and also with a high level of detail. You can get as granular as a zip code level economic impact if you really wanted to. Now, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, when you hear someone say, well, gross domestic product grew by 4%. Well, the BEA, or the Bureau of Economic Analysis, that's who track and keep that data. Well, they also create and release the input-output data and also input-output multipliers. And they do that for the county level as well. Now, they don't give you the level of flexibility and detail that you can get with Implant, but the BEA is the source of some of that data. And then finally, REMI is another provider. They also use data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, from Bureau of Labor Statistics and Census as well, to create their own detailed models that also you can do pretty detailed economic impact analysis. They have different models depending upon the different type of analysis that you want to do. So those are sort of the sources, or the sources of the models that we actually use, that we can use.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ron. And, disparity studies and impact analyses, they complement each other in their overall objective to enhance or expand economic opportunities for MWBE or diverse suppliers. However, each of the reports are used just a little bit differently, and I'm going to kind of go through some of the key elements of that. So a disparity study, and I hope many of you are familiar with that. Disparity study identifies the over or underutilization of MWBE firms for a given time period for a client. An economic impact analysis actually goes in and identifies the impact that those dollars spent with those MWBE firms on the economy. A disparity study will calculate estimates of MWBE availability within a relevant market area. An impact analysis will help you to understand that impact if more of those available MWBE firms were awarded contracts or utilized. A disparity study establishes the justification, if found, for race and gender-based goals. An impact analysis will tell you what the impact is if you do or do not achieve your goals for a certain time period. And lastly, a disparity study will make recommendations on program modifications, while an EIA, or an economic impact analysis, can be used to advocate for those program recommendations, because you actually get to see the data and the spend that money is moving through the economy. So surprisingly, if you've conducted a disparity study before, you're familiar with, or you have the data elements that an EIA needs to conduct an analysis. So note that if you have not had the pleasure of conducting a disparity study, you probably already have this data. And you will most likely be able to access this data if you've done a study or not. And you don't have to do a disparity study in order to do an economic impact analysis. If you're not quite ready for a study, you can do an impact analysis first, then come back later and do your study. If you've done a study, you have most of this data already available. So let's go through each one of the 4 data elements, just 4, that are needed to conduct an impact analysis. Total spend. And this includes spending with non-MWBE firms. So we talked earlier about that economic activity. So we need to understand the total spend for an economic impact analysis. Industry type, construction, A&E, professional services. What industry did you spend those dollars in? And note that we can even conduct an economic impact analysis by an NAICS code, be it the 4-digit, the 6-digit, NIGP, or other commodity codes that you have to define your spend more granular by the type of services or goods that you procured. Demographic data, whether or not they're minority owned, a woman owned, the business ownership classification of the businesses that you've spent money with, and of course, the location of businesses as well. As we talked about earlier, an EIA is a geographic report of what your spend is for your particular community in which your supplier diversity program is set up to work within.
Okay, so this is a sample output from an economic impact analysis. These numbers are completely fictitious, but let's assume that a supplier diversity program spends $10 million per year with diverse suppliers. Well, if you ran that through an economic impact model, what you may find is that in 2016, that $10 million spend supported 260 jobs, resulted in over $19 million in labor income. It generated almost $26 million in economic activity or value added, as we call it. And it also generated over 1.6 million in tax revenue. And then again, if you did that over a 5-year period, then at the end of that, you could say, well, over those 5 years, that $10 million per year spend supported over 1,300 jobs, over $100 million in labor income, over $135 million in economic activity, and nearly $9 million in tax revenue. And one final comment about this, this sample or this example is sort of, it's simplified in the fact that we kept the spend constant at $10 million. So actual data is, of course, is going to fluctuate. So when you do an actual economic impact analysis like this, you are going to see larger variances than what you see here.
Absolutely. And we realize that those variances are very real. And so the good thing about it is that you will be able to look at your spend year after year and determine its impact, and then be able to analyze, well, did we have something, did we have a big project that we had in a particular year? So that you'll be able to see where those variances are and then make adjustments in your program planning and outreach.
Okay, now, earlier we talked about being able to decompose the data by whether it's industry or whether it's demographic. In this sample, we used the demographics. We sort of just broke it out by MBE versus WBE. And just by this, this sample data, you can tell that WBEs are getting the sort of the lion's share of the direct spend, and that translates into a larger economic impact. And one last thing, earlier I talked about the idea of linkages, which is sort of how that, the economic impact flows and how, different sectors are connected. Well, if you remember our 5-year example, in 2020, we said that the $10 million spend resulted in 281 jobs. Well, what this table here shows you is where did those jobs, sort of the composition of those jobs? So for instance, of the 281 jobs that are created, 38 were in retail, 16 were in accommodation and food service, 10 were in healthcare and social assistance. It just keeps on going. We showed you the top 10, but that list would actually keep on going down to 0.
Absolutely.
Return on investment. As with any investment, we want to know what's the return on it. Is it a good investment? So again, earlier I talked about the idea behind the return on investment and payback methodology. To refresh, the return on investment is the benefit of the investment divided by the cost, and the payback is the amount of time that it takes to recoup the investment. So again, with our 5-year example, assuming a $10 million per year spend, we're also going to assume a $750,000 per year program cost over the 5-year period. If you ran those numbers, using the example that we had, the return on investment would be 229%. And what that means is, for every $1 of tax revenue spent on the supply diversity program, $2.29 of tax revenue returned back to the economy. And also, the total cost of the program for 5 years is recouped in just 2.3 years. So as you can see, you can use this data to advocate for your program, because what this illustrates is that supply diversity programs actually bring tax dollars into the economy.
Absolutely. And so those tax dollars that are brought into the economy, how do you communicate your economic, or with whom should you communicate your economic impact analysis to? There are various stakeholders, if you will, and communicating your impact analysis will also answer the question of some of the stakeholders that say, so what? Why do we have these programs? Why do we do these? Well, you should communicate it with local businesses, stakeholders, your customers. Even your customers really need to understand that your supplier diversity program is really helping them in the long run, right? Suppliers, the community at large, and someone in their one word of economic impact talked about community. So we should communicate with them the investment that's being made back into the community. And of course, elected officials. And so you have an economic impact analysis done and you've communicated your economic impact analysis. So how does it align, and how you should align your economic impact analysis with your supplier diversity objectives and goals? So you can use it as a tool to align MWBE program and objectives with the agency's goals. If you have very specific goals for in utilization, let's say you want a 10% increase over a 2 fiscal year period, your economic impact analysis can be used to help you align your impact to those goals. How do we adjust our program to meet those goals? You can also use your economic impact analysis to measure the success or shortfalls of your program. Create strategic plans to expand or modify your MWSBE program, either based on the way your policies are developed or written that may create a barrier. It may also be a strategic plan to do enhanced or expanded outreach to firms that maybe you have not thought about reaching out to before. So your economic impact analysis and the results of that analysis can help you to create that strategic plan to expand your reach. And then also it can help you to optimize your program and objectives for economic growth. Supplier diversity programs are economic programs. Disparity studies come just a little bit short of telling you exactly what that economic impact has. So just taking your results of a study, a disparity study, or any type of spend analysis that your organization has performed, taking it a step further to understand its economic impact will later help you, or in the short term, help you figure out what do we need to do to have a greater economic impact for our community, for our businesses, for our families, within our regional area. And so with the current economic state that our country is in, we all have felt the pinch of fewer tax dollars that have been realized by public agencies. And so there are various creative ways that you could potentially fund your economic impact analysis. And an economic impact analysis really is a cost-effective way to really understand and take your program to the next level. I can guarantee you it's not as much as a disparity study if you've ever done one. And I'm not saying you should not. You still need to do a disparity study because they do different things. These two studies do very different things, but they complement each other. But if you aren't ready to do a disparity study, but you really do want to create a better strategic plan for your supplier diversity program, there are various funding options that you could look into if it's not in your budget, or maybe you budget it for next year. Living Cities look at economic programs and how they can infuse some of the funds that they raise and they contribute. You can apply for grants there. LISC, also the Local Initiative Support Corporation, also support agencies for economic development. And don't overlook your own area economic development grants that may be available from different organizations within your own community that would be willing to provide a grant so that you could better understand the impact that your program is having on the community.
Oh, and one last thing, the new fiscal year is approaching for most municipalities and organizations. So now might be a good time to set up a call with us, a discovery call, and just kind of discuss what an economic impact analysis might look like for your program.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so in summary, we promised you it wouldn't be long, but in summary, an economic impact analysis of your supplier diversity program can create a strategic roadmap for future policy decisions. Data is the most powerful communication tool there is. When you can understand the numbers, you can really understand what direction you want to go or what changes that you need to make. And also, an EIA or an economic impact analysis is a powerful advocacy tool for your program. You can advocate for those additional funds that Ron talked about with the return on investment. You can advocate for increased outreach. You can advocate for a stronger good faith effort process when you know the more you spend with diverse firms within a region, a geographic region, the more monies that flow through the economy, the more jobs that are created, et cetera, and the more tax revenue that would be generated as well. And so we hope that this overview and kind of open discussion around economic impact analysis has proven to be beneficial for you and made you think about some different strategies that you can use to expand your supplier diversity programs. These are our contact information if you would like to reach out to us. At this point in time, we are going to open the floor for questions. And we thank you very much for attending our session today. So if you would like to unmute yourself, or if you would like to put something in the chat, we'll be more than happy to address your questions today. You have any questions?